If you think about technology such as exoskeletons, for example, it's enabling people to continue working in the workforce or enabling them to do more than they could normally do because of physical limitations.
Put that coffee down.
Creators are leaders. Be careful what kind of leaders you're producing here.
Helen, we're both in sales. Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
They realized that to be in power, you didn't need guns or money or even numbers. You just needed the will to do what the other guy wouldn't.
I'm not leaving. The show goes on.
Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Bradley Hartman. I had a wonderful conversation with Tannis Liviniuk. Fantastic name, fantastic person. She is the Digital Advancement Executive at Zachry Group. Tannis got her undergraduate degree at the University of Alberta. She got her MBA at Athabasca University, which, quite frankly, is a lot of fun to say. Athabasca. Sounds like I have a lisp, but I don't. It's Athabasca. We should do a remote podcast live from Athabasca University. Anyway, Tannis has worked for Jacobs Engineering, AECOM, the Canadian Armed Forces. She was a second lieutenant. I said, can we talk about it? She says, no, I explicitly can't talk about any of it, which made me want to talk about it even more, but I didn't. She then was part of Trillium Advisory Group, which was acquired by Zachry Group. In this conversation, we talk about her role as a digital advancement executive and how she works to filter ideas from the tech space that can help Zachry Group take advantage of opportunities, minimize risk, and be more productive and safe. Tannis shares her strong opinions why we should get away from the idea of ROI, return on investment, when it comes to technology, how leaders can ask better questions about technology opportunities that they have, and how not to be so transactional in nature, but to be more strategic. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Tannis Liviniuk, Digital Advancement Executive at Zachry Group. As always, thank you for listening. So reading your bio immediately has me leaning in. You grew up in Canada, mobilizing and demobilizing cranes, rigging material, managing logistics in extremely remote locations for a family business that apparently that they told you couldn't make it. Give the audience some context as how you got into the business and how early you were exposed to the industry.
So I got into construction generally when I was about 16. My friends were out having fun on weekends and I was mobbing and demobbing cranes and I absolutely hated it. But family business and children work for free. So, it was a good system back then. I was not a fan of being anywhere near the construction industry. I wanted to be a lawyer when I grew up. That was my plan. And as I got a little bit older, 16, 17, I started to get paid for the work I was doing. So that was pretty awesome. And I realized that construction could actually, you could earn a great income. And when I was 14, I worked at like Dairy Queen and didn't make any money. I did get to eat a lot of ice cream though. So that was the best part of the job. But in construction, I was able to earn some decent paychecks. And I was like, this is great. And so I started university. I did an undergrad in psychology, full plan on going to law school. And I spent my summers and basically any holiday time I had to pay for school, I would go up to Fort McMurray in northern Alberta and I would work shutdowns, turnarounds, maintenance work, whatever I could get during that time period, doing anything that anybody would ask me to do, either working with equipment in the tool crib. I did man watch every once in a while for people who were doing confined space vessel entry. So I got lots of exposure to lots of different things. And as I finished my undergrad degree, I thought I would take a year off and save up money for law school. And I never went to law school. I fell in love with construction. I didn't realize it that whole experience, but I was really infatuated with how dynamic the industry was. I really like problem solving. I like being in a situation where things are chaotic and you can jump in and solve problems and fix things and help people. People were like, you look like you know how to use a computer, go figure it out. And absolutely loved it. So I spent some time doing that. I spent some time in project controls, project planning, project execution, project coordination. So I got lots of exposure, but all along the way, working with technology and helping to digitalize workflows. And that was my entry point into the industry. It was not planned. And there was definitely some people along the way that told me, this is a terrible idea. You don't want to pursue a career in construction. Go pick something else. And I'm stubborn. So I didn't listen to them.
I want to go back to Dairy Queen. It's non-obvious to me that Edmonton in Alberta, which is in Canada, would have a thriving Dairy Queen business. What's that open for, like 3 weeks?
It's open all year. It's about 3 weeks where it's appropriate to go and eat ice cream. But I mean, we're Canadian. We play hockey. We like the cold weather. I think you have to, because we get like 8 months of winter a year, depending on where you live. So you just kind of have to deal with it. And I mean, who doesn't like ice cream? So
that's my hard-hitting question for you. Let's talk about Dairy Queen franchising in Canada. Tell me about just what are the general weather conditions if you are doing construction outside in that environment? Give us a little context what that is like.
It's actually a beautiful area. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. They think Northern Alberta, they think oil sands, they think refineries, they think highways and equipment. If you spend any time around that area, it's absolutely gorgeous. There's vast wilderness, there's rivers, there's streams, there's waterbeds. It's a pretty remarkable area. And so anybody who likes the outdoors typically likes spending time up there. Being in Fort McMurray and working around that area in the summertime, we get pretty warm weather up that way. So, I mean, you would deal with things like black flies and mosquitoes, and the bugs were atrocious. We called them tar sand beetles. They were like these flying beetles that made this clicking noise. They were terrifying. I hated them. If they get near you, you just run away. It was not a good thing. And they bite. They're horrible little things. But the weather itself is pretty fantastic. You get to see the northern lights up there. It's pretty awesome. And in the wintertime, it is horribly cold. So you bundle up and you do your best. There was one winter we had a really deep cold snap. It was about minus 50 with the wind chill. So that's just unbearably cold. So they shut the site down and they just had kind of a skeleton crew keeping things going, generators running and things like that. One of the generators went out to one of the offices and there was a lady in there that had a goldfish, and she came back and the goldfish was a block of ice. It was very sad, but yeah, it gets cold up there.
I thought it was going to take a dark turn where you told me she didn't make it out. She lived.
No, she was fine.
Okay. That's collateral damage I'm comfortable with. I'm glad she was safe though.
She was safe. Wow. Yes, everybody was safe. Just not the goldfish.
I'm just going to jump ahead here. The title of Digital Advancement Executive, you're in charge. You're responsible for advancing all digital things. That seems like a big role. How do you process this and break this down into, okay, this is what is achievable. Here's how you can make the biggest impact.
You're right. It is a big role. What really drew me to this role, what makes me excited about it, is I've spent time with startups. I've spent time leading startups. I've spent time with technology companies, working for tech companies. I've spent time with EPCs, owners, contractors. And one thing I've always noticed within the industry is structurally, it is very difficult for technology startups or salespeople or representatives for tech companies to get in front of the right people in contractor organizations, EPCs, GCs, owner organizations to share their solutions and see, pitch and see if it might be a good fit. So we end up with all this marketing material online, and it becomes very overwhelming for teams to navigate and search and find solutions that they think might be a good fit because there's just so much information out there. But structurally, as an industry, we don't make it easy to open the door and allow companies to come in and say, hey, I have something that might be a good fit. Check it out. So my role is really focused on two directions. So one is looking at opportunities to improve awareness and education internally around digital tools that are either emerging or exist within the industry that we might not be aware of. And that includes general theoretical concepts like artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, new hardware coming onto the scene, such as reality capture devices and things like that. But also working with those teams and having conversations with them and understanding what their workflow is, where there might be opportunities to integrate technology or digitalize some of those processes, and ultimately just make life easier for people. And that's where the rubber meets the road. And then externally, we've really opened the door, and we're having conversations with people around startup tech and emerging tech. And a few weeks ago, I posted on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, startups, I want to hear your pitch." And I probably got 100 responses. It was, my LinkedIn inbox was completely full. And it was great. The response was awesome. And the feedback that I heard from people is like, we don't get this opportunity in the industry. So all these startup founders and salespeople were like, this is unheard of. You're opening the front door and allowing us to come through. Even if it's not a fit, we get a chance to pitch and just need an opportunity to get in front of the right person and show us what they're doing.
My immediate thought was, whatever you do, Tannis, do not put anything out on LinkedIn saying you want to hear people's pitches. I would have been afraid for you, but you are so right. I feel like there's this weird dynamic where companies have very real needs and fears and pains that internally are well known. And on the outside, there's all these companies that are just trying to figure out, and the word I wrote down before you even said it was, they're just trying to see if it's a fit. Is it fair to say your general role is to internally understand the biggest opportunities and challenges to improve the overall business, but then also filter the whole wide range of possible technology and digital tools that might be available? Or is that too poorly stated or too broad?
No, I think that's pretty much spot on. I mean, there's a lot of breadth in the role that I have, but ultimately, our goal is to advance the use of digital tools within the organization, whatever that might look like. That might mean digitalizing a process that's not already using technology. Maybe it's manual and it's something that we could incorporate some automation in, or incorporate the use of tools that would make that process easier for the people that are executing it. But also it's really difficult to advance the use of technology if you don't know what's on the market. And there are so many solutions out there. There's so much investment going into the construction technology space that it's almost impossible for stakeholders to keep up with all the tech that's available, product updates, features, functions, and new tech that's coming out at the same time. And then also determine whether it fits with existing processes. That is just a gargantuan task. So where there's synergy and the potential to collaborate, then I help facilitate that.
What have you learned about messaging, and we'll call it prospecting? So you open the floodgates and say, "Hey, I'm here. I want to hear your pitch. Make sure it's good, but I'm open. This is my role. This is how I want to help." What have you learned from salesmanship in general that has made your life easier? Or what advice might you have for people to say, "Listen, I'm available. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm saying I want to hear your pitch. However, there's some people out here who are doing it poorly. Don't make these mistakes." Take that either way you want it.
I think so. The best pitches that I've had, I'd say they fall into one of two categories. The first is they ask very direct and upfront qualifying questions. They know their product well, and they know that there are facets of how an organization operates that may make that solution not a fit right at the outset. And that might be a required integration with another solution, or perhaps the ERP system you're using. Something is going to qualify or disqualify that solution. And I love it when somebody comes in and says, "Here's 3 things I'd like to know, because if the answer to one of these questions is no, we're not going to be a fit, and I'll tell you that right up front." And I actually posted on LinkedIn not long ago commending somebody on a sales team, because 5 minutes into the call, he told me, he was like, "This is not going to be a fit for you guys." I was like, "That's great. You're not going to spend 25 minutes trying to convince me that at some point, 5 years down the road, the roadmap might align, and you should consider it anyway." He was very direct, very upfront, and I appreciate that. That's how you build good relationships in the industry. And at some point down the road, he's going to reach out to me and say, hey, I've got a solution. He's going to be the first one to get time on my calendar, because I know when he reaches out, he thinks he's got something that's going to fit. So great pitches sometimes are where you don't pitch at all, and that it helps everybody. But secondly, I'd say the best pitches that I've seen where we take the whole session and really dig into it, they start out not by interrogating me. I'd say those are the worst pitches. Somebody that comes in and says, hey, what are your biggest pain points that you're struggling with within the organization as a whole? And I'm like, that is an impossible to answer question in the 30 minutes that we have in this call. So it's a big organization, right? Like I need to know what your solution does, who you are, what problem you're addressing. And then if you want to ask what pain points I have in that specific area, that's a conversation that we can facilitate. But I'd say off the bat, don't interrogate your attendee as soon as you get into the call. Build a rapport, get some basic information down. The best pitches I've had start out with introductions. I want to know the person, I want to know the company. And they start out identifying why they built this solution in the first place. And they start digging into that problem statement. And if that's a problem statement that resonates with me, I'm leaning in and I'm very interested. So they've got my attention right off the bat. Pitches that could definitely be improved are the ones that just dive into the features and functions with no overarching explanation of what the solution is, does, or who it's really built for. And sometimes that's just passionate founders or technology teams. They're really excited about what they're doing, but they need to tell the story. If you can't tell the story, it might be a great fit, but I'm going to leave the call not knowing that because it just wasn't communicated. So storytelling is key.
Oh, that's what I wrote down story too. Tell them a quick story about who you are, why you built this, but then turn it around and say, hey, I'm going to be really specific. It's not for everybody. Tannis, tell me what you think. I think that's why sales is so hard. And there's relatively few great salespeople because you got to walk that line between them.
You do. And I think doing your homework is important as well. I'm a little bit biased, but Zachry is a fantastic organization. And I will talk about our company the entire call if you let me and ask me to. But I think it's important for sales teams to come to the call prepared, having researched the company, the industry segments that we operate in, the size, the scale, some of the projects that we've been involved with. I mean, all of that is readily available through quick searches. So coming to the call prepared, I think, is important. When somebody joins the call and says, I don't really know much about your company, tell me all about it, you're using valuable time to gather information that you already could have. I mean, I'm going to tell you how great the company is, and I'll carry on for 20 minutes if you'll let me, but that's probably not a good use of a salesperson's time if they're really trying to make that pitch and get in front of the right person and communicate that story effectively.
Maybe I want to transition here. You had a funny line, I thought it was humorous, where you said something to the effect of, hey, when we think about digital tools and technology, it's not like a pickup truck. It's not an asset. You're not going to see it as an individual line item. And it was part of this broader conversation just about one of the challenges or frustrations you see is thinking about technology in a very kind of transactional frame of mind. Do you mind sharing that a little bit and how we came to the pickup truck comparison?
If we truly want to digitalize the industry, we need to think in terms of how we use technology as an integral component to executing activities. And I've seen some panels where you'll have like contractors and owners, and they're having a conversation around who should be paying for the technology. And should that be a line item on the contractor's invoice? Should the owner be paying for it? Should it be a joint effort? And I think that's the wrong question. The questions we should really be asking are, how do we incorporate technology into workflows so that employees within the industry have a more seamless experience? They have access to the right information at the right time so they can do their job more effectively. I mean, nobody goes to work wanting to like wait around for information all day or try and find material. It's not just increasing performance on projects and performance potential, but it's also making it more likely that we're going to recruit more people to our industry and retain them long-term as well, because people recognize that those tools are out there, right? Everybody's got cell phones these days. I mean, they've got access to applications. They're using technology. in their lives on a day-to-day basis. And we should be using similar technology in our workflows. And I think we really just need to get away from the whole discussion around who's paying for it, the transactional nature. And I referenced before, it's not a pickup truck. It's not a line item that you just kind of tack in and say, well, for $3.25 an hour, you too can access data from that. Like we can't think about it like that. It's not a pickup truck. Digital solutions are not intended to be transactional if you actually want to achieve substantial results from their use. We need to think about them in terms of how they are integrated into core workflows as just part of how tasks are done. Employees, owners, executive leaders all expect a consumer-like experience. They don't want to wait 2 weeks to get an update on the status of something. They want that update now. And the only way to do that is through the use of solutions that provide that consumer-like experience.
I just consistently remind myself with our products and the way that we help folks is that on a long enough timeline, our personal preferences become professional expectations. And what you were talking about on real-time updates, I don't think we have to think that hard, or we could do it over a beer of just thinking about, let's just look at one process. How can we take that Amazon mindset and the way that we know however we may feel about Amazon, we're still buying because it's really efficient and it's relatively inexpensive. What would have to be true to bring parts of that into what we do every day? Those conversations I found are really fruitful, but you got to have somebody who's kind of nudging them forward. Talk to me about the ROI. What's the return on the investment here? Is that a legitimate question? And how do you handle that when a lot of leaders want to know, all right, I'm putting in X, what am I going to get back in Y over what time frame?
ROI it's a term that I think we need to eliminate entirely from the technology conversation, because
why?
It forces us to revert back to some sort of transactional analysis of how technology is used. And I think that perspective is misplaced. And the reason I say that is when you distill the use of technology down to dollars and cents, and you look at how much did I spend versus how much can I quantify I gained, you're going to overlook benefits that are not quantifiable or not immediately quantifiable. So I saw a post on LinkedIn from a VC who said, every tech has to create ROI, otherwise you shouldn't be using it. And I kind of jumped on and very quickly said, I vehemently disagree with that, because if you think about technology such as exoskeletons, for example, that technology may not create an immediate ROI in terms of dollars, but it's enabling people to continue working in the workforce that may not have otherwise been able to due to physical limitations, or enabling them to do more than they could normally do because of physical limitations. It's also going to open the door to people who would have never considered careers in construction for whatever reason. You can't distill everything down to financial value. And if you are, you're absolutely missing the point of some of the use of technology. Now, that's not to say that you can just kind of deploy whatever you want and, forget about any benefits and just use cool tech. That doesn't help either, because you end up inundating people with solutions that don't create value. I co-hosted a podcast with Jeff Sample, and we had a guest on that talked about return on implementation was the term that they used. And I love that because it gets us away from the discussion around financials and focuses our attention on value gained in both quantifiable and non-quantifiable, so more qualitative areas. And I think when you consider all of those benefits, you can get a really good perspective on how much value that solution created to the organization overall.
I've just continually come back to the realization that human beings and the way that we think, we are not well adapted to quantifying, understanding, and appreciating bad things that don't happen. There's a recognition that, by doing this or that, well, surely we've eliminated some things that didn't happen, but that's not really a fruitful conversation to have with most people because it seems so theoretical, even though we can all agree on it. So when you have the exoskeleton, like how many injuries were prevented, or how many people, how many man hours were able to get talented people to continue working? And at do like that return on implementation. It does force a different conversation. As you think about your career, does any particular failure come to mind that you would say, at the time, it certainly did not feel good? We're not trying to go out there and fail. However, I learned some really valuable lessons and insights from that have changed the way that I think and I lead. Does anything come to mind for you, Tannis?
I worked on a project. This was quite a few years ago. So this was back when proximity readers and RFID technology and barcodes and things like that were starting to be used more and more on site. And I was working with a team, and I was doing a little bit of training with them, and we were talking about material management and material traceability. And somebody in the back of the room put their hand up and said, "Are those tags used in our ID cards?" And I said, "Actually, yes. On this particular project, your card that you use to badge in and badge out each day is enabled with that technology." And the story that I got from this team was like, okay, so some of us thought that, and most of us think that there's like this GPS tracker inside of the card. So here's what we do, because the company's watching and they want to see how productive we are and they want to see who's the most productive. So they said, what we do is we all brass in the morning, and then we take our ID cards off and we give them to somebody who's got a pickup truck, and they drive around site all day. So we all look super busy. And then we pick up our cards at the end of the day and we all brass out. And so it turns out on this particular project, those cards were enabled with RFID tags, and proximity readers were set up at muster stations. So in the event of an emergency, everybody had their ID cards on and they would muster. And if somebody's card hadn't been picked up at one of those proximity readers, they would know who was missing. But because this technology was not explained, not rolled out properly, and people, I don't know if you've heard the line, if you haven't come up with a rumor by, or somebody hasn't told you a rumor by 9 o'clock, start one. I've heard that many times on site. And people love a good story, I guess. So in this particular instance, they created their own story around what these badges were going to be used for, because it was technology that was not properly rolled out. And it just comes down to communication. But the benefits that were expected from this program obviously were not realized in the short term and created just as much of a risk as there was before, because nobody had their ID cards with them during the day. Kind of pointless. So it's a deployment that I was tangentially involved in, but it's a story that stuck with me. And I still get a good laugh out of it. I still tell people this story because it's something it seems so innocuous in terms of how we roll things out and communicate and just expect that people are going to trust the technology and trust that the leadership team is using this technology for the right reasons. But without proper communication, without explanation, without involving stakeholders so they know why this technology is actually being used, the story that can be crafted by the people that are using it is sometimes so wildly off base that it creates these situations that are very much unintended, but a very real negative outcome as a result of using that technology.
Yeah, I had, there's the CEO of Binswanger Glass was on a podcast a few months ago, and he had this line that I've been repeating and thinking to myself that fits exactly what you're saying. He said, in the absence of clear communication, your team will fill in the blank and they will do it negatively. Like they're not going to give the benefit of the doubts that they're thinking, you know what, this is great. They're thinking about how they're going to compensate me extra for seeing how productive I am. They're thinking the opposite. They're thinking, what is the worst case scenario for me, given this technology and what I can even dream about, what bad consequences and how can I counteract that? But I also think that's just like human nature, which just this idea too, I've talked a little bit about, is thinking more about this idea of cascading communication. Come down from the top and it's like gravity, water, it's your friend. And once you get that information rolling, the communication will be clear and it's going to go all the way to the bottom. Like, that's not how it works. You have to hammer this home at every step of the way. Otherwise that will happen. But
Absolutely. And, I think it's fascinating how much trust people will put in technology, in applications that they use in their personal lives, and how there's a skepticism the minute they walk on site around what this technology is being used for, because you'll still hear conversations today around track and trace tools and location enabled devices and even wristbands and things like that have accelerometers. So, if somebody falls, it'll pick that up. Right. You'll hear somebody say, and I hear this at conferences and events sometimes, somebody will be like, I don't want somebody tracking me. And I'm literally looking at them as they're holding their cell phone. I mean, you've got a smartphone, you probably got location enabled, you're already being tracked. I mean, I think it's quite fascinating how people just accept that in their personal ecosystem, but are more skeptical about the intention of the use of that technology in a professional or working environment. And I think, to your point, that just comes down to communication. I think it's education, it's awareness, it's filling in that why question. And I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, and start with why. And if people understand why the technology is being used, they're going to be far less skeptical about it and much more excited and hopefully encouraged and encouraging others to adopt that technology and actually use it for its intended benefit. Yeah.
You inherently trust Instagram because they have your best interest at heart. Yet your employer, well, let's, I don't know, we've worked here 20 years. Like, us. That's a fascinating observation. I couldn't agree more. All right. Last question, then I'll let you go.
Okay.
As you look around maybe your office, any books stand out to you that was valuable to your own career progression and the way that you think and lead?
It's fantastic. It's called How Not to Be Wrong. It's by Jordan Ellenberg. And it reframes how you approach problems. And one of the concepts is in terms of how to fortify planes in a warlike experience that are coming back with ultimately bullet holes in them. And they're looking at where they should reinforce the infrastructure of the plane to make it more resilient. And the question was flipped in terms of how you look at it, because those are the planes that are coming back. What you really need to be thinking about is where the planes that didn't come back were hit. So if you're seeing 30 bullet holes in the wings, well, the wings are probably okay. But if you're not seeing any impact in other areas of the plane, that's probably where you want to focus your attention, because those are more likely to be the planes that didn't return. So it's an interesting book. It throws out a lot of stories, but it really just changes your perspective on how you look at the world, but ultimately problem solving, and forces you to think about things from a different angle. And I think that's really important in any industry, but especially construction, where it's dynamic and things are always changing, and problem solving is a big part of our role. And if you can flip that perspective and change the way you think, you're going to come up with more creative solutions, and ultimately you're going to do more amazing things. So definitely one to read.
Wonderful. I will buy that. I will read it. I have a client who's very good about asking me and their team. They'll say, okay, they're very data driven. Here's what we have. What data don't we have? There's almost always some obvious, really valuable piece of data that we don't have. Sometimes you can access it, you can, and other times you can't. But just even that awareness of, we only look at what there is. So are we constraining ourselves to that? And that speaks directly to that. So that's wonderful. Well, Tannis, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
All right then, friends, how did that go? Hopefully you enjoyed my conversation with Tannis. I believe the rate of adoption of new technology and the number of talented people who are trying to create new tech opportunities for us to use in construction is going to increase. So understanding this role, whether it's formal in a large organization like Zachry, this digital advancement executive role, or all of us, on how we filter the new opportunities that are available to us and what we're using in our personal lives to offset some of the risks, take advantage of some of the opportunities, and build on some of our core strengths using technology is going to be a competitive advantage. I firmly believe that. So understanding how people like Tannis are thinking differently and implementing change is going to be something we all need to do a better job of, including and first with me. If you did get value from this conversation, please share it with your network. The people in your lives look to you to try to determine where to invest their limited time and attention. And if you'd be willing to share this podcast with them and encourage them to listen to it, I would appreciate that. And it will help us bring our entire construction community closer together so we can collaborate better, more profitably, productively, and safely. All right, I'm done. I'm out. We're going to close out like we always do with our leadership mantra. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.